Hey and welcome, I'm Hammeh, and today we'll be taking a look at the lore and story learnings from Overwatch's new short story, Lucky Man, by Melissa Scott, and starring Soldier 76 or Jack Morrison and Sombra. We discover the latest in Jack Morrison's mission to reveal what really brought Overwatch down, as he searches for answers from an informant in the ruins of war-struck Omnic Crisis Zurich. I'll be going through all of the Overwatch lore talking points and interesting bits of the story, along with a little light speculation on what new Overwatch story and lore we may have learned from it too. Timecodes are in the description below if you'd like to skip around. Firstly, a quick summary of the story for you. As Null Sector waged battles against humanity all around the world, Jack Morrison is now in Zurich and attempting to make his way to a meetup with an informant. We see Jack in action as he swiftly dispatches some Null Sector warbots and indeed Null Troopers. However, it's not without a little bit of pain on his side and a reflection that he's not quite as quick as he used to be. Making his way to the rendezvous point, the smell of burning plastic as parts of Zurich burn triggers Jack into a little flashback that he tries to forget, and then into a memory of his first trial mission in the Soldier Enhancement Program with Gabriel Reyes, along with its runner and founder, Dr. Victoria Norton. Sombra reveals herself to be the contact, and the two exchange a few barbed comments before Sombra finally gets Morrison on side. Something Sombra has been chasing for a long time may coincide with the interests and questions that Jack is asking about, and the answers apparently can only be found in a UN warehouse here in Zurich. A storage container with debris from the remains of Overwatch's Swiss headquarters may give both of them the answers they seek. However, Sombra needs help to investigate it. Morrison is not happy entirely at trusting Sombra, but recognises that this is the only opportunity he has to try and get some answers. Following up on a plan made by Sombra that included Morrison as a vital component, the two make their way up to the warehouse through security and inside. When inside, Morrison is planned to clear the way to the storage facility itself, and Sombra will create a distraction. We see the two working together during combat and executing a plan. We see the extent of Sombra's capabilities and indeed Morrison's specific knowledge helping Sombra too. A lot of hacking schematics and gunfights later, Morrison stands before the door of the vault. However, given that Sombra has been in a lot of trouble on the comms as he's been trying to reach her, he's not sure whether he should leave or stay. Morrison's condition of working with Sombra was that they wouldn't aim to kill and that they would try and avoid as many guards as possible. In the meantime, he ties up guards, fully well knowing that his identity might be compromised, and manages to find one of two passkeys needed to open the door. Cue Sombra, who arrives in the nick of time, and with the second key, the door is opened, and as soon as Jack steps in, the sights and smells give him a full PTSD style flashback to the events of that fateful day. Morrison is haunted by a phantom pain in his leg that apparently came from him being impaled, that skewered through his leg, and him being trapped by concrete in the aftermath of the explosion of the Swiss headquarters. And just before then, it turns out he had been throwing punches with Reyes. Sombra talking to him snaps him out of his trauma, and Morrison proceeds to go through the wreckage, finding very many individual mundane items that give him memories of various Overwatch personnel and times. Sombra has said to Jack before that he is the only person who can see something that doesn't belong, which is the intelligence that she received from her research. After sifting through the wreckage, Jack finds a flat disc that appears, in his words, to almost absorb light. Recognizing it to be neither Overwatch nor UN technology, he believes that this is what they are looking for. The two make their escape and catch their breath, and Sombra reveals her information in exchange for Morrison handing over the disc. Morrison explains that he always believed Reyes was too surprised at that moment when the Swiss HQ was destroyed to have known that it would be happening, and he always thought that someone else other than Talon might have been the reason. Scanning the disc, Sombra finds a mark, a stylized eye with 3 dots above the pupil and another 3 dots below. She believes this is the proof of something beyond talent. Hints and whispers have told her of a greater power or force, and that this is their mark and symbol. Sombra advises Morrison to start in Oasis, while she tries to investigate the disc further, and the two go their separate ways, with Morrison happy he has something tangible to continue the chase with. There's the story in a nutshell. Here's some details I really enjoyed. Firstly, it's great to dig more into Jack Morrison, Soldier 76, both in combat but also in terms of his headspace and story and where he is in the present day. Now, clearly he's key to the whole plot of Overwatch, past, present and potentially future, but we've seen a lot of Jack Morrison really in the last few years. He's one of the characters who even since 2016 has had a regular pace of lore, from the Old Soldiers comic back in 2016 post Overwatch 1's first launch, to Bastard, his short story with Anna, where following up from that comic, the two proceed to dismantle Hakim's operation in Egypt. That, I believe, was in early 2019. He, along with Anna, then feature in Valkyrie, Mercy's short story. That was November 2019. And then with Lost Ghosts, the Anna and Soldier story before this one in Heroes Ascendant, and now Lucky Man. Jack Morrison, or Soldier 76, is probably the character we've seen more lore for than any other character, I'd probably say, with the exception of Tracer. In Lucky Man, we join him as he feels that at least, if not the end, then some answers to the questions that he has had about Overwatch are in sight. We've seen his focus throughout all of these previous stories, his obsession with working out what happened to Overwatch and whether there was something else involved in the collapse of the Swiss headquarters, come to a culmination. And in this story, as he's in Zurich, we see this continue. He is absolutely, even though the city is being attacked by Null Sector, very, very focused on his goal. He will take out the Null Sector troopers and the Null Sector bots in between him and his informant meetup point, but his decisions are governed by him and his goals. He takes out some Null Sector bots on the way to his rendezvous with Sombra because they're on his path. Obviously Zurich and many civilians could probably do with his help, but he's got his own mission that he's on. He does, however, ask Sombra not to shoot to kill, and that he wants to avoid the guards when the two decide to infiltrate the UN storage facility, so he still does have some of his own original principles. When he attacks the team of guards outside of the door to the storage facility, he disables them all. He makes the decision not to kill them, in his words, in cold blood. He didn't want to start doing that, and binds them, knowing full well that he may have given away his identity to them by doing so. It's always good to see Morrison in fighting action, but obviously this is being told through his eyes and through his voice, and we hear his thoughts and his analysis on how he's doing. For example, in his initial encounter with Null Sector, he decides to take out one bot to prevent the other two from getting through, and he takes one shot into the midriff of the first warbot before trying to aim for the cannons. He hits the first set of cannons fine, but kind of misses or glances the second. And with some Null troopers supporting the artillery, although he deals with them, he's left with a little reminder, a sharp ache in his ribs from dodging the Null troopers. Maybe these are mistakes that Jack Morrison in his prime wouldn't have made. Later in the story, when Sombra has found a way into the compound and he has to pull himself over a wall, he struggles for a moment, in his own words, feeling his age also. A member of the soldier enhancement program he may be, devastatingly competent he may still be, but Jack Morrison is not what he once was. However, his historic knowledge and experience come in very handy. He informs Sombra not to use comms too much because the UN facility might still be able to detect what they're saying, and when he is taking on the 10 or so guards outside of the storage facility door, he knows a lot of their protocols, a lot of how UN troops would defend and move towards threats when they arrive. He even mentions at one point that he identified as a problem or a mistake that his soldiers in Overwatch even would make. Sombra actually knows that she couldn't have done this without him, and Jack's experience is very, very clear. And the final insight in this bit, where I really enjoyed looking into Soldier's character and past a little bit more, is that we see this kind of PTSD and these reactions that he has, particularly to memories of the Swiss headquarters being destroyed. Various sounds and smells of the battlefield throughout this story actually flash back Jack Morrison into memories of his past. The primary one is that of him being in pain in the Swiss HQ's destruction, which I'll talk about later as its own separate section, but there's also one where he actually remembers his first Soldier Enhancement Program test mission, where he and Reyes, along with Dr. Victoria Norton, deployed to hold a particular junction and test out Morrison and Reyes in the field. Now, Morrison's memory is of Reyes and him agreeing that they didn't want to be branded as lucky or have the luck, as Norton described it, that all of the half-dying and injured men around them in the dropship didn't have. Morrison's memory is of the transport stinking of blood and hot metal, filled with soldiers dead and dying, too many of them and not enough medics, bandages or anything that would help them. These were in the early times of the first Omnic crisis. Even at that point, him and Reyes were united in the fact that they didn't want to be lucky, if this is what luck meant, and this is probably luck that would haunt them later in their lives. Secondly, it was great to see a bit more recently from Sombra in terms of her motivation and what she's been up to. Now, we've seen Sombra, of course, pop up in various stories, whether it was A Great Day, Malga's recent little Talon mission trip with the Talon gang, in Zarya's comic going back a few years, and of course as a mysterious figure talking to Baptiste in his short story, but also with a hand lightly steering Soldier 76 in such stories that I mentioned, such as Bastet. It's cool to see how precise and how well researched Sombra is to start with. For example, when Morrison is going to meet her, she's given him precise instructions as to what the building looks like and where to meet within it. Throughout a chunk of stories, actually leading back to Michael Chu's in 2019, we've had this thread of Sombra kind of lightly guiding and nudging people along as she gets the information that she requires for her own, as she puts it, pleasure, her personal interest in trying to work out who's pulling the strings and who is the threat that nearly perhaps ended her life several years ago. Now, Morrison and Sombra have crossed swords in Dorado not too long ago, and Sombra is very, very quick and diplomatic to defuse the situation. She knows what Morrison is interested in, and she very quickly forges uneasy, shall we say, working partnership between the two of them. We still get a chunk of Sombra's personality and joking around when Morrison confirms on the mission that he's Oscar Mike on the move. She says, "And a Carlo Robert to you too." After being a distraction while Morrison can clear the way to the storage unit, she drops in with a translocator, and when he says we don't have much time, she just replies with "so true, so true." Very big Carolina Ravassa vibes there. It's nice seeing sort of the writing in many of these short stories linking up with the personalities that the Overwatch voice actors have given their characters. Although there are a chunk of characters who obviously don't like Sombra, she does very much seem to have her own kind of honour amongst thieves of a sort. As for her planning and proficiency in combat, it's cool to see too. We've seen her individual competence in things such as infiltration, her origin story trailer, even in A Great Day, the Malga animation recently. Here we see her more sort of calculating and planning, and in her pre-mission and planning, not just the heat of the action. Sombra's plan that she has made to get into the facility is a good one. She's clearly very able to adapt and work with people on the fly, or perhaps plans by knowing a lot about them in advance, as we've seen sort of hinted at in her voice lines and interactions with people in game. She leads Jack into what seems to be an alley with no escape, knowing that his height and he will be able to boost her up onto the wall at precisely the height to get her in. A small detail, but it shows that she's planned meticulously and that she knows how tall Morrison is, and obviously this plan is only suited for the two of them working together. Equally, although she knows that from her intel she needs to identify something in this wreckage that doesn't belong, she of course knows that Morrison is the person to do that. He also brings other benefits to her as well, giving her useful information on, for example, using comms frequencies around UN technology and the habits and patrol patterns of UN guards, as well as their protocols in reacting to incidents. Jack knows that with Null Sector a lot of the guards are going to have been pulled away, and equally how they should react if there are disturbances near them. We see Sombra running security loops of footage to cover cameras, sharing schematics of the various buildings and rooms, corridors and even guard locations to Morrison into his visor as they're on mission, even including precise distances to staircases that Morrison needs to make his way to. In the midst of the fight, she pulls away the guards and creates a big distraction under what seems to be heavy fire from the communications between the two, and reminds Morrison that they need to allow themselves time to get out and take time for that as he's surveying the wreckage. So outside of Sombra's usual slight comedy or slight on-the-fly and hijinks when she's been depicted in shorts and media so far, it's good to see the kind of cool and calculating side of her in the field as well. Thirdly, we actually get some insight into the fabled Swiss HQ incident. Now, this has been talked about, including blogs from when Overwatch originally launched in 2016, hinted at in various other media. It's been focused as by many as being the kind of point where Overwatch kind of fell apart, and although it had been struggling for a few years as we know before that, it was the point where, with Reyes and Morrison both missing, presumed dead, rumours abounded, the UN inquired into things and Overwatch eventually got shut down because of it. Now, at this point, before we jump into the details, just talking about Jack Morrison, we see it through his eyes, obviously, in this story, and it's always as kind of a flashback and intrusive thought. Now, I'm not a doctor, but in terms of research and looking at some of the symptoms or ways in which post-traumatic stress disorder manifests, PTSD, flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. I mean, Morrison has all of these during this story, so really we discover about the Swiss HQ through Morrison's PTSD. Several times during the story, his head flashes to this space at the smell of burning plastic initially before he brings it under control, but when he actually steps into the container and sees the debris, smells the same smells as he did on that day, it actually takes him out of himself for a minute, and it's Sombra shouting into the microphone or shouting next to him that kind of brings him back into focus. So these flashbacks or these sort of, traumatic events really kind of take him out of himself, out of focusing for a moment. Morrison's flashback is he'd been in the middle of this before, nearly died before, buried under a slab of concrete, a piece of rebar thicker than his thumb, punching through his thigh to pin him in place. He had healed long ago, but the pain of that injury haunted him, unlike the 1,000 lesser bruises and cuts that covered him now. He remembered heaving at the concrete, certain he was trapped, dying, dead, and equally certain he deserved exactly that for all the stupid things he'd done leading up until that point. He'd never gotten it right, not in time to save his people, and he'd been too much of a fool to avoid fighting Reyes when they should have been working together. He could still feel Reyes' punch, feel himself block the following blow and launch a punch of his own, but before it landed, the world dissolved into smoke and flame. He'd had one last glimpse of Reyes' face before he was blown backward, tumbling with the debris into unconsciousness, to find himself trapped under the rubble, bleeding and beaten, and sure he was dead. Now, at this point, the thought of being able to even save Reyes, save others who had been further from the explosion, he then managed to get the concrete off himself, painfully extract the rebar that had been pinning him to the ground from his leg, and then he snaps back into reality with Sombra talking to him in his ear. So we know, as was hinted at by Atlas News in that blog from 2016, that the two were actually fighting. That has been confirmed. However, there's a second very important clarifying point. When they have escaped the situation, when Morrison has handed over the mysterious disc to Sombra and she has shared some information with him, Morrison confirms this. Jack paused again, the memory sweeping through him, the taste of blood on his lips and Reyes' unbridled anger. And then the explosion. The instant of wide-eyed shock on Reyes' face before everything was swept away. I was with Reyes when everything exploded. I saw him. He was as surprised as I was. He shook his head. If it had been Talon, he would have known. So that, along with the evidence that Sombra finds, seems to confirm that if it was Talon, then Reyes wasn't aware, and if it wasn't Talon, then it was something else entirely. So important context as to what actually happened. Well, if not Talon, if not, as Jack Morrison said to Sombra at the time, everyone said it was Talon with Reyes' help, maybe O'Dearin's. That's still the obvious answer, but it never felt right. So if not them, then who? Well, last and by no means least, we get a throwback to the Eye conspiracy, as it was known at the time back in 2016. So when Sombra had that big ARG, that big puzzle that we were all solving together for months and months and months after Overwatch's launch in 2016 and leading up to the BlizzCon where she was announced as a hero that was playable, we had the Sombra Origin trailer. Now, if you want to have a look at 25 or 30 minutes or more of this, the Sombra ARG and the Eye Conspiracy, I've linked those videos in the description below. For those of you who need a quick refresher, at the end of her Origin trailer, Sombra says that she wants to effectively find out who runs the world and find out what kind of body was behind or who or what was behind her having a brush with danger, as we see in her trailer. Now, as he's going at the end of Lucky Man through the wreckage of the Swiss HQ, Morrison finds this disc, this silver-edged disc as it's described, with a black coating that almost absorbs light. And when Sombra scans it, after a while, there is an image of this eye with 3 dots above the iris and 3 dots below, as it's described. So, of course, this is this logo that we see at the end of Sombra's Origin trailer with the whole web, the Eye Conspiracy as we kind of dubbed it at the time. So we have a nice not only throwback here to old Overwatch lore, but we know that Sombra has been pursuing her own investigations throughout, from infiltration and her manipulation of Katya Volskaya, her brush in the comics with Zarya, her talking to Baptiste, as well as doing things with Talon. She is also pursuing her own agenda. She wants to find out what this symbol represents, who or what this organization or entity is. And outside of working with Talon, she is willing to work with anyone to be able to achieve this goal. Now, this is, if you're familiar with sort of storytelling or film writing, a little bit of a MacGuffin or a MacGuffin, depending on how you want to pronounce it. It's kind of an object or an event or something in a story that is necessary to the plot and the motivation of the characters kind of like drives them forward, but you may never actually find out what it is. It's not important in and of itself. So this conspiracy, this object drives the plot forward. It's what they're going to find in the story. It then links into the story, but we may not necessarily know what it does. It might just be a calling card for all we know. But whatever this disc actually is, it tells us that maybe, just maybe, this entity, organization, person, AI, who knows what it is at this point, may have been something to do with the Swiss HQ's destruction, that maybe it wasn't Talon. Which leads us into the sort of endgame. Well, what's next? Well, Sombra says to Morrison she feels he should go and chase the trail of this symbol to Oasis, while she decides to try and decipher what this disc actually is or could be. There's clearly an electronic element to it because she uses a hack or some technology on it, and this symbol appears from it or on it. Now, in the events of the last story, Morrison has left Anna, and Anna is going through the list of Overwatch agents that Reaper stole from Watchpoint Gibraltar right back at the events of Recall in 2016. So while Anna goes around to try and prevent other people on the list from meeting some of the fate of other agents who have effectively been assassinated by Reaper and or Talon, Morrison, Soldier 76, is off continuing his own quest, but with more motivation and a tangible lead, and Sombra is one step closer to discovering who may have had an impact on her life in the past as well. And it's worth noting as well, to draw this video to a close, that this is the last story in this compilation. We have dotted around several characters in this compilation, and I'll do a separate sort of review of Heroes Ascendant as a compilation as well. But it's worth mentioning here, it does feel that not only with Soldier and Sombra's story here in Lucky Man, but also with the compilation in general, it feels like we're kind of reaching a next step. It's kind of like a setup point. Overwatch is back in a form, or the Overwatch 2 team is back. We have Winston, Castian, the gang. They are traveling places. They are solving things. We have lone actors such as Kiriko and Hanzo coming together in Tokyo. We have Anna protecting people on her mission. We have Morrison on his mission. It feels like we're kind of coming to a bit of a crescendo, that there's going to be a point where Overwatch are troubleshooting all of these different missions. Even with the story campaign missions that we got, who knows if we'll see any more of those. All of this story feels like it's been designed to bring us to this kind of crescendo point of, well, what happens next? And I'm going to be interested to see whether that's a set of story missions too, maybe it's more books, maybe it's animations, who knows what. But it feels like we're kind of reaching this point of a lot of characters finding a new place, finding a new purpose, teaming up with new people, and it feels like there needs to be another plot point to drive the story forward even more. But we'll save that for another time. So there we have it, Lucky Man, the last of the Overwatch Heroes Ascendant stories, but not the last of the videos on this channel, as I'll be going through all of the other stories here, so keep an eye out for some more. If you like this video, throw a like, subscribe, let me know in the comments down below what your favourite things about this story were. Have you been reading these, whether on the Overwatch website or the book? What would you like to see in terms of Overwatch lore coming next? Where do you think things are going to go? Love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't been to the channel before, do check out all of my nearly 8 years worth of Overwatch lore story and the lore and story and voice lines, interactions and things from a bunch of other games in the playlists here. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.